Hello everyone. On behalf of the Latvian Institute of International Affairs, I have a pleasure to invite you for a discussion on the Eastern Partnership. I think the region that is profoundly challenged with the rising and assertive Russia policies and at some point feckless and inept policies from the West to address those challenges for multiple years. I'm Associate Fellow Dr. Sandis Šrāders, and today I'm really pleased to introduce two distinguished experts. One of them, Juris Poikāns, ambassador, one of the best, I would say, from the Latvian diplomatic corps, has been working as ambassador in Ukraine and very pivotal country for Eastern Partnership, Poland, a country that was responsible for crafting the very idea of Eastern Partnership in 2009. I remember I was participating at a forum and debates where member states were contributing and assessing their contributions to those policies. On the other hand, I would like to invite Arkady Moshes, the Finnish Institute of International Affairs representative, I think also very important country that has experienced the popular shift and change of foreign and security policy to favor the membership in NATO, since the Eastern Partnership region has experienced rather profound turbulence. And today I would like experts first to assess the question, what is enough? What is enough for the region, and what should the Eastern Partnership countries see and experience the West or the European Union and NATO do to address their challenges? And the first question would be, if the membership in the EU and NATO is the only way to stabilize, secure, and ensure the economic prosperity of this region. And I would like to give the first award to Ambassador Juris Poikāns. You have been at the helm of the crafting of this policy, and you have been ambassador in two pivotal countries, one that was the author and one that was the subject of this policy. What are those views that you would share about the prospects? The floor is yours.
Thank you. Sandis, Arkady, great to see you, and thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting event. Concerning your question, I think the war or Russia's aggression against Ukraine at this moment clearly shows that to stabilize this area of Europe, namely the countries of Eastern Partnership, I think it's impossible to do it without the European Union and NATO due to many reasons. The first reason is we have a couple of unresolved conflicts in the area. Transnistria, we have Abkhazia, we have South Ossetia, we have Nagorno-Karabakh. We have now an open war against Ukraine. And I think without the European Union and NATO, without the active role played by both these institutions, I believe it's impossible to stabilize at first security situation in this area. The second is, with every successive enlargement of the European Union, we are getting into the Union countries which are in greater need of assistance. At first we had 10 countries which joined, then we had Bulgaria and Romania, and I'm not only the ambassador to Poland, but a non-resident ambassador also to Romania and Bulgaria, and I can see even the difference between Poland, Romania and Bulgaria. So if we look at the countries, for example, like Moldova, and also the countries of Western Balkans here, let's say Serbia, North Macedonia, Georgia, they are even in greater need of both political and financial assistance. So as a result, it's impossible to do it without the European Union and NATO. The third is, for these countries to change, you must implement very serious reforms. And I think it's extremely easy to say that you must be compatible with some kind of EU standards without providing adequate financing to implementing these reforms. As a result, again, this is impossible to do it without the European Union and NATO. I think this war currently shows that in general, it's extremely difficult nowadays in Europe to remain classically neutral, and specifically Finland and Sweden joining the NATO, from my point of view, proves this point. I think the case of Switzerland or, for example, Austria is completely different if we compare these situations with Ukraine or Moldova. So due to these many reasons, from my point of view, if you want to have stability, prosperity, It's impossible to do it without European Union and NATO. On the other hand, and this is my last point, I will be very happy to listen, Arkady, I think the European Union has realized that it needs these countries too. This war has changed some dynamics in the mind of some Western European leaders as well. We hear the statement by Chancellor Scholz, where he says that he sees the future of Ukraine within the European Union, something completely unimaginable before February 24. We see the start of accession negotiations with North Macedonia, Albania, something again what was not possible before February 24. So for the European Union, probably there are the same arguments why to accept these countries in the European Union and NATO. The first, it's again about stability. Without the EU clout, it's impossible to imagine the existence of Bosnia-Herzegovina. It's impossible to imagine the resolution of these frozen conflicts when it comes to Moldova and Georgia. And it's also the initial plan of the Eastern Partnership was about building the zone of prosperity. I think if we want to have at first stability in our immediate neighborhood, so it will open up some new ways also for prosperity for this region, which will benefit the European Union at the end of the day. So from my point of view, this is some kind of two-fold track where both the Eastern Partnership countries have an interest, not all of them obviously, but at least 3 of them have an interest. And at the same time, from my point of view, the European Union has realized that in order to complete the vision of Europe whole and free, there is no other option but to accept these countries as a part of the European Union in the future.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Poikāns, and I think your ideas are very interesting. And at some point, you outline and emphasize the reciprocal interest that we share, us, the Western European countries, or those who enjoy the memberships in the EU and NATO, and those who are aspiring to become the members. And from the perspective of the Baltic states, I think these security challenges with Ukraine have finally transformed and put the end to the neutrality ghetto of Scandinavia. And finally, we are happy here in the Baltics to see Sweden and Finland willing to join NATO, our common transatlantic security alliance. Therefore, I would like to ask Arkady Moshes, do you really see that the European Union and NATO could bring stability, security, and welfare to the Eastern Partnership region and transform it in a way that was possible or probably was the objective for the Eastern Partnership policy? The floor is yours.
I think without the consolidated policy of the West, primarily maybe targeted and channeled through the organizations like NATO and the European Union, it would be impossible to expect positive results. But of course, we have to understand a number of things. One is that there is no region here. The Eastern neighborhood is not a region. It's not an entity with internal cohesion. It's a group of countries put into this group somewhat mechanically already at the moment of the inception of the Eastern Partnership Initiative, basically based on geographical criteria and also on the criteria of their former belonging to the former Soviet Union. Otherwise, the 6 countries that we are talking about are too diverse. Why does that matter? That matters because some of them do not want to be members of the European Union and NATO. Take Azerbaijan. Some of these countries, well, Ukraine definitely has made its choice, and it has made it the hard way. Moldova and Georgia say that they have made the choice, but there are still lots of questions whether it's really so, but okay, let's imagine it is so. Belarus is only yet about to make a choice because it's a country which is, well, basically divided inside of itself. Armenia is about, or will probably make this choice at some point in future, but the future is so distant that it will depend on too many things that will have happened in between. So, I mean, the fact that the region is so diverse implies that different policies will be required. So, membership is not a necessity for all of these countries. It simply will not be achievable because the EU countries, many member states, will not be ready to provide it, to grant it, to offer it. and because the potential candidate or partner countries will not be willing to demand it. But the policy, a strategic policy, is definitely required. Here we have, of course, bad and good news. The bad news is that for as long as the war between Russia and Ukraine is going on, resulting in all the sufferings, all the hardships, all the deaths, all the destructions, before we know how it will end, it will not be possible to plan the future and to plan specific policy as a line that would allow us to get from point A to point B. This is a bad news because this war can continue for a long time. I'm always very unhappy about this sense of euphoria, which we often meet in the Western media when we read the accounts of what's going on, where it often looks like Russia has been already defeated and everything that remains to be done is like to really plan a victory parade on the Red Square in Moscow of the troops that will defeat Russia. This is not the case. It's a country that can go through a lot to still continue doing what it has been doing. But so before we know how the war will end, it's a bit too difficult to plan a policy. The good news is, of course, is that the West is essentially free of many illusions that it had before. It's no longer dodging a conflict with Russia. It's no longer giving Russia the final say in defining the future of this region. This is a new thing and this is important. And of course, we have a formal emanation of this change of approaches, which is the promise of the EU membership for Ukraine and Moldova, which is a very serious shift in Western policy. But what remains to be done is, of course, you mentioned the Eastern Partnership, and this is exactly the question. So when I'm talking about a strategic policy, that policy would have nothing to do with the current organizational form of that policy, which is still the initiative of the Eastern Partnership, which treats the region almost as one size fits all. Okay, that's been improved somewhat, but not completely. But furthermore, it still operates with categories which are from the previous historical epoch: connectivity, resilience, all these nice sounding words, which half of the people, of the addressees, do not understand, and the other half rejects because they want something much bigger. So, to make a long story short, a policy is required, and it has to be a totally new policy, which would take into account the individual character of each and every Eastern neighborhood country, individual needs, and the realistic possibilities of achieving different levels of stability, security, and regional integration between them. I'll stop here for now.
Thank you very much. So we can conclude the Eastern Partnership as a region has been artificial. Russia shouldn't have any say when it comes to any policies by the West as it had before, because Europe and the West has always treated Eastern partners differently. You have to do something in order to achieve something with the European Union. I think only with Russia we have been really patient. Let's trade and see how Russia is becoming a democracy. We can see where it has led us now. So we can conclude the Eastern Partnership has failed to achieve its results and is basically dead. So what are the countries in Europe or the West that could lead the novel approach or defined approach for the policy that would define those diversified relationships? And I like what Arkady Moshes emphasized: different levels of security and different levels of prosperity vis-a-vis different countries. So both Belarus and Ukraine should be treated equally according to its stance and interest to cooperate with the European Union. And what could be the dialogue? Should Europe listen at the Eastern partners, or some European countries should lead a policy and make an offer to those countries? What would be your view? And since Juris Poikāns is covering broader region, residing in Poland, covering broader region on behalf of Latvia, maybe you could start with this broader approach to go a bit narrow when I'll give a floor to Arkady Moshes.
I completely agree with Arkady that these are 6 very different countries who are united maybe by the fact that they have been a part of the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union. But if you look what is common between Moldova and Azerbaijan, you find at the end of the day very, very little. Plus, 2 out of 6 countries are into open war, namely Armenia and Azerbaijan. But the fact that the European Union was making such kind of a combination of these countries, it's also, I would say, for big players like for the United States, for China, it's a bit a similar problem. So the European Union was identifying these countries as 6 partners, actually probably not at the end of the day fully realizing how different they are. So it's true that all 6 countries in a way have 6 different ambitions when it comes to the European Union. It was very visible also during the Latvian presidency in 2015. And each country had its own ideas when it comes to the Eastern Partnership. Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine saw it as some kind of, let's say, trampoline to jump towards the European Union, while for Belarus, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, it was a platform of negotiations between the European Union and the respective countries. So the European Union probably was overemphasizing this unity. So from my point of view, number one is we have always talked about the principle of differentiation. I think it was very artificial to deny membership perspective for those countries which are willing to join the European Union. And I agree with Arkady. It's very clear when it comes to Ukraine now. It's sometimes not so clear, but at least clear now with Moldova, and it used to be clear with Georgia. So you have 3 countries which see their destiny within the European Union. And there are 3 countries, it's also true, they don't share this ambition. And when it comes to Belarus, actually, they are de facto not anymore a part of the Eastern Partnership. So, and I think number one is its differentiation. So we must listen to the partners, to their priorities. Obviously, our aim shouldn't be artificially include any countries of the Eastern Partnership into the European Union. If Armenia and Azerbaijan don't want to be a part of the European Union, this is fine. And we respect their free and sovereign choice. Because we were always telling, if we want to build Europe whole and free, it shouldn't be about spheres of influences. It should be about really the ability of every European country to join any alliances. So this is number one. The second, obviously, the European Union is a very complex entity. And I think, yes, I agree with Arkady. We have some serious changes when it comes into the thinking of Western politicians. But at the same time, I believe we have one problem, which has definitely not disappeared, is that we still perceive these countries in Europe seas from different national perspectives. And it's also true that, for example, for countries like Latvia, Poland, Lithuania, probably the countries of Mediterranean will not be a crucial priority. It will be the countries of Eastern Partnership. And it's equally true for countries like Portugal and Spain, who will have another priorities. So any decision when we come to the European Union, it should be a consensual-based decision. There should be some kind of leading players, and we are trying to lead. It's Poland, it's the Baltics, it's Czech Republic, Slovakia, those countries who see a greater engagement of the countries of Eastern Partnership in the European Union. But as it's a consensual organization, we must have acceptance on, at the end of the day, of all countries of the European Union. So I think a big step has been done recognizing explicitly the European perspective. We have some demands already put by the European Union, I think 7 points when it comes for Ukraine to start accession negotiations. So we must start planning this process to reach the stage of accession negotiations. And my last point is, I wouldn't say that the Eastern Partnership has been an unsuccessful policy. The aim was to build the area of stability and prosperity. Another question is that we didn't have some kind of strategic thinking at the end of the day, what is achievable or not. But the Eastern Partnership as a platform, I think it still can stay as long as countries like Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia have not joined the European Union.
Thank you very much, Juris. Arkady, your views?
First of all, I also want to say that Eastern Partnership, when it was launched, was a useful initiative. with all the limits. But it passed its prime, and I would actually, if I were to decide, I would formally archive that policy and abandon it, because I don't think there is a lot of potential left. There are people who are involved, but this policy has to be thanked for what it actually has achieved. It has achieved the visa liberalization, the association agreements. It needs to be remembered. So it played its role, but it has outstayed its usefulness. Now, spending the resources on Eastern Partnership would mean achieving less and less for the same buck spent. And finding new money will be problematic. So I would come up with the idea of offering 6 individual policies. We know what needs to be done with Ukraine. It's a policy of accession when it becomes possible. The European Union knows how to run the policy of accession, the conditionality. Ukraine should not be allowed to repeat the unfortunate experience of several Balkan states who will have been in the candidate status for decades and decades and decades before they potentially join. This is not the way it should be done. Conditionality should be serious, but conditionality should be there to promote reforms, not to create conditions or not to create pretexts to postpone the actual final entry forever. But this is more or less clear with Moldova. It might be, on the one hand, more difficult because some of the problems are deeper in Moldova. On the other hand, it's a smaller country. Georgia needs to know that the membership path is open to it if it stays committed to reforms. However, if there is a regress in reforms, it also should know that it is not going to become even a candidate. Azerbaijan and Armenia are 2 different cases. You should cooperate based on the vehicles of cooperation that you have. In Armenia, it's the state of the civil society, which is very vibrant. It's an economic interest. It's the interest in bringing more Western mediators in the conflict and those who will maybe guarantee the territorial integrity of Armenia differently from the way that Russia has been doing it so far. And in the case of Azerbaijan, it's energy. I mean, we can say it many times, we don't need to be happy about it, that it's only energy, but if it's only energy, it has to be that. The most interesting and intriguing case is actually Belarus, because as I said before, Belarus is a country which has not yet made its choice. It will have to make it by historical standards, realistically, very soon. We are talking maybe years, but not decades, because the reign and the rule of Mr. Lukashenko will come to an end, I'm certain, sooner rather than later, because of the structural crisis that his rule is driving the country further deeper and deeper into. But, of course, here you have to understand, we have to understand, that there is no point of dealing with Lukashenko. There should be no illusions that this person, he has a logic in everything that he's doing, but his logic is about staying in power. With the help of whatever devil he can find, his purpose, he wants to stay in power. He doesn't want to reform the country. He doesn't want to bring it closer to Europe. He doesn't want to defend the sovereignty, because when the sovereignty helps him, he emphasizes sovereignty. When it doesn't, he doesn't. It has to be, the policy has to be much broader. It's not only again about supporting the opposition. It's about finally making Belarus an offer, which it will be able to understand, discuss, and the offer on the basis of which the choice will actually be made. It's not about money, just money, and it's not about the promise of membership. That's why it's so difficult. But the people of Belarus should know what they are going to get in all sorts of economic and social terms if they choose Europe, if they choose domestic liberalization, if they choose the market economy. They should not think that it's about Russian 90s. They should know that there is solidarity, that there will be support, but that has to be made clear before anything starts. It's much more difficult than, as it was in the past, running pompous security forums in Kiev to which the Europeans were coming to shake Lukashenko's hands. and promise him something which again was never delivered even to Lukashenko in terms of what he might have been expecting from the West. It's a very difficult case, but it's also a crucial case, because if Belarus decides market and democracy, the region will be much better off than it is now. It will be much closer to standing in stable security and at least well-being than it would be in case the Belarusian development was going the other way.
Thank you very much. Those are really interesting ideas. And from everything that you said, there's another profound question that stands out, how to address those countries, individual policies, their willingness, and who's going to be responsible and where the money is going to come from. Like Arkady, I think really good question, because without the money, we cannot really have a policy. And in the air, there's always this buzzword, the Marshall Plan. And probably if someone in Minsk hears the word, some kind of like historical analogy comes into play. It was called the European Reconstruction Plan in the past. And European might not sound that well in Belarus because of all the Russian narratives. It's like, because it would inflict different kind of identity issues. But if in a constructive way we would offer the Marshall Plan for those eastern countries, what do you think would be the roster of the countries that would raise hand and say yes, assuming no leader would be thrown out like former Czechoslovak Foreign Minister Masaryk in 1949, and everybody would be allowed to participate? Really open policy. From where should the money come from? From Europe, the United States? And I think most importantly, which countries should be responsible for facilitating and administrating this money for those countries who would be willing to embrace such assistance with a date certain for the European membership and probably NATO? What would be your thoughts on that? Whoever wants to go first, I would offer first to Juris, since you spoke last, but then also Arkady to play around this new question that I would like to propose to you.
I think when it comes to accession negotiations, I absolutely agree with Arkady. We have a great deal of experience when it comes to the European Union. And I think the key challenge here is not just to postpone indefinitely, let's say, this accession process. And it's also true not only for Ukraine and Moldova, but it's also true for North Macedonia and Albania. So it should be very clear criteria and conditionality. So we don't need to invent a new wheel here. So when it comes to the Marshall Plan, there are many plans already elaborated. One is, for example, by GMF. There is another plan made by the Swedish Institute of Economics on the needs, let's say, of the Ukrainian economy, and different discussions who would coordinate, let's say, this assistance, be G7. From my point of view, maybe logical, it would be the European Commission. But okay, this is a question upon discussion. I would say, when you see nowadays the most active countries maybe in supporting post-war reconstruction, you see a clear role by Poland, and you see also a very big role by Germany. There is a decision now made by the European Union to train Ukrainian soldiers, and there was some kind of unofficial competition. So I would expect, let's say, when it comes to Ukraine, after the war, it would be largely Germany and Poland who would show, let's say, the biggest interest. Together, obviously, with all European allies, I think it shouldn't be confined and close to the European Union. We must engage the Americans, we must engage Arabs, we must engage Japanese. But you would imagine those countries which are situated closer to the region probably will have a greater interest. When it comes to Belarus, I absolutely agree with Arkady. I think changes will be rather sooner than later, and I would imagine at the end of the day the return of Belarus to the European family of democracy as a nation. And then it comes, let's say, to the future priorities of the Belarusian government, it should be decided both by the nation and the new government. Nowadays, Belarus faces very serious domestic problems, and I imagine we can develop some kind of a Marshall Plan for Belarus, but it's a very open question how to reach the Belarusian society, how they get aware, let's say, of such a plan. From my point of view, we must wait for some domestic changes in Belarus itself, and then we must envisage a plan which would offer clear opportunities, let's say, for the Belarusian state. So I don't see what we can do anything else, because we have discussed it and we have imposed a very different kind of sanctions when it comes to Belarus, but as we see, the regime is still surviving.
Thank you very much, Juris. Arkady?
Money is, of course, a crucial question, but it's not the first question. Because at the initial stage, when you're talking about a country like Belarus, potentially like Armenia, like Georgia, we are not talking hundreds of billions of dollars. We're talking about relatively small money compared to everything Europe has spent just in the last 10 years on the economy, on helping some of the big economies of the Union. It's not about that. It's about commitment of European politicians, which in turn requires from them a certain vision, which again is linked to the answer of one question: where do they want to go? Do they understand that to have Belarus in the family of like-minded democratic nations really is in the interest of Europe? Many will say yes. Some will say we are not convinced. It's the same people who have been running the reset policy in relations between the West and Lukashenko in 2015, 2020. I mean, tons of arguments have been written to warn the people that this was a wrong policy, that they were not going to overpay what Russia was paying him, that he was not going to change his convictions because he has convictions, which are dictatorial, but they're nevertheless convictions. And many of these people are still in the business, and they don't want to be reminded about what they were doing in 2015, 2020. So they're setting up the argument that Lukashenko is not that bad, that even now Lukashenko needs to be engaged with simply because Belarusian troops are not participating in the war. I mean, Belarus is named in the UN General Assembly resolution from the 2nd of March this year an aggressor state, because it fits a classical definition of aggression. Providing your territory to the other state for the aggression against the third state is one of the classical definitions of aggressions. This is what Belarus did under Lukashenko. And this is that's why people voted the way they voted. But these European politicians and other people are still talking that he has not crossed the red lines, and so on and so forth. I don't want to go too much discussing details. My point is that they don't have a vision. Why don't they have a vision? Because they actually were not that uncomfortable. It's part of the larger problem. They were not that uncomfortable with the world they lived in before COVID. They would want to return to the world before COVID. They have a difficulty to admit that this is not possible. And because they themselves do not have these convictions, they're not even trying to convince the electorate in their own country. So of course, somebody needs to talk to those people, for instance, in Eastern Germany, or in Rome for that matter, who come to these multi-thousand demonstrations against the current Western policies on Russia. These people will be happy to come and demonstrate against the potential policy of integration of the Eastern neighborhood. This is difficult, this is sad, but this is a real problem. This needs to be addressed before you actually come up with a plan of how much and on which project you're going to spend. Or maybe at least in parallel, there has to be a vision why to do things differently is not only wise, but necessary for the European Union. We should address these issues first. And after we have addressed those, we will understand that money is actually not an issue. As we're now seeing that the money spent on the support of Ukraine is not that much of an issue. It's partly an issue, but it's not that much of an issue. Imagine the same amount of money would be required for Ukraine a year ago. It definitely would have never been found. But now, on a monthly basis, new installments are coming because the issue is about understanding why something that is to be done is important.
Thank you very much, Arkady. I would like to wrap up this in a nutshell, as I understand about the Eastern Partnership, which is no longer as it was. It was inefficient, and now it's pretty much dead. And we can see the money cannot buy security, stability, and economic wealth in Ukraine. First, we should come up with a vision and ideas that should come from Central Eastern Europe, from your points, because Italy or Spain is less interested in the neighborhood that stands to the east from the European Union, and some countries might be willing to embrace the same stability, values and security as us, and we as humans should provide it to them. So thank you very much, Ambassador Juris Poikāns, residing in Poland but covering Romania and Bulgaria, and Arkady Moshes from the Finnish Institute of International Affairs. On behalf of Latvian Institute of International Affairs, I would like to thank you for joining this discussion. I think it was really interesting.